Miles Trenster stood at the front of the conference room holding my quarterly report, the one I'd spent 3 weeks perfecting. The Monday morning meeting had started normally, but his expression told me something was wrong. "Allison," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "come up here, please." I walked to the front, feeling 20 pairs of eyes follow me. My heart pounded as Miles opened the report to page 17. "Can you explain these numbers?" he asked coldly. I leaned in to look. The spreadsheet showed investment projections I'd never seen before. The figures were inflated, the calculations deliberately wrong. "I didn't write those," I said quietly. "These aren't my numbers." Miles smiled without warmth. "Your signatures are on every page, Allison. Are you saying you falsified data to make yourself look good?" The room fell completely silent. My hands started shaking. Those weren't my projections. Miles had asked me to send him my draft 3 days ago for review. He'd changed everything and printed it under my name. "Read the error aloud," he commanded, holding out the page. My throat tightened. I couldn't speak. That was the day I stopped defending myself. "You're done here," Miles announced before I could gather my thoughts. He gestured to Francine from HR, who stood by the door with a security guard I'd never seen before. "Effective immediately. Please collect your personal items and leave the building." I looked around the conference room at people I'd worked with for 4 years, my team, people I'd trained and mentored. Not one person met my eyes. They all stared at their folders or their phones. "Miles, please," I started, but he cut me off. "Security will escort you out. Your access has been revoked." I walked back to my desk in complete silence. The security guard stood 3 feet away while I packed my coffee mug, my plant, and the photo of my father. My badge wouldn't open my desk drawer. They'd already deactivated it. Francine handed me a box and watched me place my belongings inside. The walk to the elevator felt like a funeral march. When the doors closed, I saw my reflection in the mirrored surface. I looked like a stranger. As the elevator descended, I whispered, "He planned this." The title appeared in my mind. He thought I was dead. My name is Allison Vaughn. I built the investment analysis department at Trent& Wyatt from absolutely nothing. When I started 4 years ago, Miles was just the ambitious nephew of founding partner Heiress and Trent. I taught him everything about financial modeling and investor relations. We worked late nights together, building proposals that transformed the company. 6 months ago, I discovered something that changed everything. Miles had stolen my proposal for the Clearwater merger, a deal worth $30 million, and presented it to the board as his own work. When I confronted him privately, he'd smiled and said, "Who do you think they'll believe?" 2 weeks later, he became department head. My promotion went to someone else. I started documenting everything after that. Every email, every meeting, every stolen idea. I planned to report him to Harrison Trent himself, but Miles was faster. He didn't just take credit for my work, he made sure I disappeared completely. Now, standing in my apartment with a cardboard box of belongings, I understood the depth of his betrayal. 2 weeks after my firing, I drove home from a desperate job interview in the next city. The position was beneath my qualifications, but I needed income. My savings wouldn't last forever. The mountain road back to town was empty that Thursday evening. I knew every curve, every turn. I'd driven it 1,000 times. When I pressed the brake pedal, approaching the steep descent, nothing happened. I pressed harder. The pedal went straight to the floor. My car picked up speed, 40 miles per hour, 50, 60. The guardrail rushed toward me as I yanked the steering wheel. Trees, sky, metal screaming, glass shattering everywhere. My head hit something hard. The world went black. Later, investigators would find the brake line had been cut cleanly, not worn, not damaged, cut. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was darkness and pain, and the terrible certainty that this wasn't an accident. They said no one survived. The local newspaper ran my obituary 3 days later. Former financial analyst Allison Vaughn, 32, killed in tragic car accident on Route 7. The article mentioned my education, my brief career, my deceased parents. It said I had no surviving family. Miles gave a statement to the press. "Allison was a valued colleague. This loss is devastating to our entire team." He attended my funeral at Riverside Cemetery. I saw the photos later. He wore a dark suit and cried for the cameras. My former coworkers stood in a somber cluster, some genuinely sad, others just fulfilling an obligation. Francine from HR brought flowers. The company sent an enormous wreath with a card signed by everyone in the office, even the people who'd watched me get humiliated and said nothing. The pastor spoke about my dedication to my work and my kindness to others. They buried an empty coffin under a simple headstone, my name, my dates, and the word beloved. Miles stood at the graveside until everyone else left. Then he walked away without looking back. But I wasn't dead. I woke up in my father's countryside estate, 60 miles from the city. The Victorian mansion had sat empty since he died 2 years ago. I couldn't bear to sell it, but I'd never mentioned it to anyone at work. I didn't want them to know my family had money. The caretaker, old Thomas, had found me crawling from the wreckage. He'd been driving home from town when he saw the crash. Instead of calling 911, he recognized me. He knew about Miles. I'd told Thomas everything during my weekend visits to the estate. "You need to disappear," Thomas had said, pulling me from the smoking car. "Let them think you're gone." So he took me home. Broken ribs, concussion, cuts everywhere. He called his daughter, a nurse, who treated me secretly. For weeks, I lay in my childhood bedroom watching news coverage of my own death. The pain was terrible, but the clarity was worse. Everyone thought I was gone, and in that moment, I realized I was finally free. 2 months after the crash, Thomas brought me a letter from my father's lawyer. The envelope was thick, official. Inside was a document I'd never seen before. My father's complete will. He'd owned more than I knew. Not just the estate, but shares in multiple companies. The biggest surprise was Wyatt Industries, a holding company with interests across the region. According to the will, I now controlled 40% of Wyatt Industries, enough to influence major decisions. My father had been silent partner to dozens of businesses, including one I knew very well, Trent and Wyatt. Heiress and Trent had built his company with my father's backing 30 years ago. The partnership agreement gave Wyatt Industries permanent voting rights on major company decisions. Miles had no idea. Neither did Harrison. My father had kept his investments private, managed through lawyers and shell companies. As I read through page after page of holdings and assets, one thought kept repeating in my mind. He just didn't know who really signed his paychecks. I spent the next 6 months rebuilding myself. Not the eager, people-pleasing Allison who'd let Miles steal her work. Someone new. I cut my long brown hair into a sharp shoulder-length style and dyed it darker. I bought elegant business clothes instead of my old safe choices. I studied corporate law with my father's former lawyer, a sharp woman named Victoria. She taught me about hostile takeovers, shareholder agreements, and contract clauses that could trap the unwary. I learned about leverage points and power dynamics. My father's old business partners, people I'd met at holiday dinners as a child, became my teachers. They remembered me and wanted to honor my father's memory by helping his daughter. I took a new name for business purposes, Allison Rhodes, using my mother's maiden name, different enough that casual recognition would be impossible. I practiced a new signature, a new way of speaking, colder, more direct. By the time I was ready to return, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning justice. 1 year after my supposed death, I walked into the glass tower that housed Trent and Wyatt. The lobby was exactly as I remembered. Marble floors, modern art, the smell of expensive coffee. I wore a tailored navy suit and carried a leather briefcase. My heels clicked confidently across the floor. Miles passed me near the elevator bank. He was talking on his phone, laughing at something. He walked right past me without a glance, didn't pause, didn't hesitate. His eyes slid over me like I was furniture. My voiceover played in my head. He looked right through me. Perfect. I rode the elevator to the 10th floor, where Victoria had scheduled a meeting with Harrison Trent himself. As a representative of Wyatt Industries, I was there to discuss investment opportunities. Harrison was older now, his hair completely gray. He shook my hand warmly. "Miss Rhodes, your family's firm has been invaluable to us over the years." He had no idea I was that family. For the first time in a year, I smiled. Not the fake smile I'd worn for Miles, but something real and sharp. Victoria and I spent 3 weeks crafting the perfect contract. We called it the Rhodes Capital Expansion Agreement. The deal offered Miles exactly what men like him couldn't resist: money and power. Rhodes Capital would invest $15 million into his division. In exchange, he would temporarily transfer operational control of his department's assets to a holding company for restructuring and growth. The contract was 50 pages long. Most of it was standard legal language about investment terms and profit sharing. But buried on page 37 in a clause labeled Administrative Contingencies was the hook. If Miles violated any fiduciary duties or ethical guidelines during the agreement period, complete control of all transferred assets would permanently transfer to Rhodes Capital. And I had documentation of his theft and fraud going back 2 years. The contract defined ethical guidelines broadly enough to include everything he'd done to me. Victoria smiled when she read the final draft. "This is elegant," she said. "He'll never see it coming." We sent the proposal to Miles's office with a professional cover letter. He didn't read the clause I hid in plain sight. The board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning. I attended as Allison Rhodes, representative of Wyatt Industries and Rhodes Capital. The conference room was the same one where Miles had destroyed me a year ago. I sat at the far end of the table, notebook open, face neutral. Miles strutted in 10 minutes late, wearing an expensive suit I recognized. He'd bought it right after stealing my Clearwater merger. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I have incredible news. Rhodes Capital has agreed to partner with us on a massive expansion project." He spent 20 minutes presenting my contract as though he'd negotiated it himself. He never once looked at me. Harrison asked careful questions about terms and timelines. The other board members nodded along, impressed by the numbers. I watched Miles carefully. Every lie, every exaggeration, every confident gesture. He was exactly as I remembered: charming, ambitious, and completely certain of his own brilliance. When Harrison asked if anyone had concerns, I remained silent. The board voted unanimously to approve the preliminary agreement. Miles grinned. "He still doesn't know who I am." After the meeting, I visited someone I'd thought about constantly during my recovery. Lila worked in accounts receivable on the 3rd floor. She'd been my closest friend at the company before everything fell apart. I found her at her desk, looking tired and older than I remembered. I introduced myself as Allison Rhodes, a consultant reviewing department efficiency. We talked for 30 minutes about workflow and processes. Finally, I asked about department morale. Lila's professional mask cracked. "It's terrible," she admitted quietly. "Our director is a nightmare. He takes credit for everything, blames everyone for his mistakes, and fires anyone who questions him." She paused, then added, "He fired someone I cared about a year ago. I tried to defend her. He demoted me the next week." My throat tightened. I hadn't known. "What happened to her?" I asked. "Car accident. She died." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "I should have done more." I left an envelope on her desk after she went to lunch. Inside was a letter of reinstatement to her previous position, signed by Harrison Trent. At the bottom, in small print, "From an old friend." Miles signed the preliminary agreement 3 days later. Victoria called me with the news. "He barely read it," she said. "His lawyer skimmed the first 20 pages and called it standard." I'd known he would. When a man like Miles tastes victory, he stops reading fine print. He threw a party that Friday to celebrate, a rooftop event at an expensive downtown hotel. As a business partner, I was invited. I wore a red dress and arrived fashionably late. The party was exactly what I expected: expensive champagne, important people, Miles at the center of everything. He gave a speech about vision and growth and seizing opportunities. He thanked Rhodes Capital for recognizing his potential. He raised his glass. "To brilliant partnerships." Everyone drank. I stood near the windows holding my champagne, watching him work the room. Our eyes met across the crowd. He paused. Something flickered in his expression. Confusion, maybe recognition. Then he laughed and turned away. He toasted to the woman who would destroy him. I took one sip and smiled. The party dragged on for hours. I stayed near the edges, observing. Miles worked the room like a politician, shaking hands and making promises. Twice more, he looked at me with that same confused expression. The third time, he walked over. "Miss Rhodes," he said, extending his hand, "I wanted to personally thank you for this opportunity." His handshake was firm, practiced. Up close, I could see he hadn't changed at all. Same confident smile, same expensive cologne, same empty eyes. Your proposal was impressive, I replied carefully. I'm looking forward to our partnership. Have we met before? He asked suddenly. You seem familiar. My heart hammered, but my voice stayed calm. I don't think so. I would have remembered. He laughed. I meet so many people. It's probably nothing. He launched into a speech about his vision for the expansion, his plans for the company, his brilliant strategies. I nodded at appropriate moments, letting him talk. Recognition flickered again in his eyes, just for a second. Then someone called his name and he walked away. I exhaled slowly. That was close. 2 weeks later, an anonymous email arrived at the city's largest business newspaper. The email contained documents showing Miles had misused company funds. Small things at first: expensive dinners charged to project budgets, travel expenses for personal trips, hotel rooms that didn't match any business meetings. The newspaper published a brief story. Nothing major, just a few paragraphs questioning expense account practices at Trent and Wyatt. The company's stock dropped 0.5%. Miles called an emergency department meeting. I watched the video feed from Victoria's office. He was furious, pacing and shouting. Some disgruntled intern is trying to sabotage me, he announced. Find out who leaked this. He blamed the accounting department. 3 people were investigated. One was fired, a junior analyst who'd questioned an expense report months ago. I watched it all happen and felt nothing. He's bleeding, and he doesn't even see it. The investigation found nothing conclusive. The story faded from the news cycle. Miles declared victory, but the seed was planted. Board members started asking questions. Harrison requested detailed expense reports. The walls were closing in. The final contract signing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Victoria and I arrived early, setting up folders and documents in Harrison's private conference room. The second agreement transferred operational control officially. Miles would remain as department head in title, but all financial decisions would flow through Rhodes Capital for optimization. What the contract actually did was give me ownership of all his operating divisions, every account, every asset, every decision. The clause on page 37 would activate the moment I presented evidence of his ethical violations. Miles arrived 20 minutes late, distracted by a phone call. His lawyer, a junior associate from a corporate firm, skimmed the document quickly. Looks standard, the lawyer said. Just expanded terms from the preliminary agreement. Miles signed 7 places without reading anything. His signature was confident, flourishing. Harrison witnessed the documents. Victoria notarized them. I placed my copy carefully in my briefcase. Congratulations, I said to Miles. This partnership will be transformative. He grinned. I've never been more certain of anything. It's done. I spent the next day walking through the city, remembering who I used to be. The eager young woman who'd worked 80-hour weeks to prove herself, who'd believed hard work would be rewarded, who'd trusted people because she wanted to be trusted in return. That woman was gone. I'd killed her as surely as Miles had tried to. I passed the coffee shop where I used to grab breakfast before work, the park bench where I'd eaten lunch while reviewing reports, the bookstore where I'd browsed on Friday evenings, dreaming of having time to read again. Everything looked the same, but I saw it differently now, through harder eyes. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Board meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning. Harrison wants a full financial review of Miles's department. Are you ready? I typed back, yes. Then I added, it's time. Justice doesn't always need applause. Sometimes it just needs to be quiet and thorough and inevitable. I went home to my father's estate and slept better than I had in years. The boardroom exploded with tension the moment Miles entered. His face was red, his suit wrinkled. My accounts are frozen, he shouted at Harrison. I can't access any departmental funds. My authorization codes don't work. Harrison looked exhausted. We're conducting a financial review, Miles. Standard procedure for all partnership agreements. This isn't standard. Someone is sabotaging me. Miles slammed his briefcase on the table. I have investors waiting, deals pending. This is unacceptable. I entered through the side door, carrying my leather folder. I wore a gray suit, my hair pulled back, my face calm. Miles looked up. Our eyes met. His face went completely white. Hello, Miles, I said quietly. The room fell silent. He stared at me like I was a ghost. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Harrison frowned. "Ms. Rhodes, thank you for coming. We're just addressing some administrative concerns." "Actually," I said, placing my folder on the table, "I'm here to address something much more serious." I opened the folder and removed the original contract. "Miles, do you remember signing this?" He couldn't speak. His hands gripped the table edge. Finally, he whispered one word. "Allison? You're dead," Miles said, his voice breaking. "You died. I saw your funeral." "No, Miles," I kept my voice steady, professional. "You killed who I used to be." I laid out document after document. The stolen Clearwater proposal with his handwriting in the margins, emails where he discussed taking credit for my work, the falsified report he used to fire me, financial records showing he'd charged personal expenses to company accounts for 18 months. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered, every betrayal documented. Harrison's face darkened as he read. The other board members whispered urgently. Miles's lawyer looked like he might be sick. "These are forgeries," Miles tried. "She's insane. She faked her death to frame me." Victoria stepped forward with a calm smile. "Everything has been verified by independent auditors. The signatures match. The financial trails are clear. And the contract you signed 3 weeks ago has an ethical violations clause." She flipped to page 37 and read it aloud. The room went completely silent. Harrison stood slowly. "Miles Trenster, the board is voting to remove you as department head effective immediately." Miles lunged toward me, but security stopped him. "You planned this. You've been planning this the whole time." Miles's lawyer tried desperately to claim the documents were forged. My client was clearly under duress. "This is entrapment." Victoria calmly presented the authentication reports. Digital forensics confirmed every email. Handwriting analysis verified every signature. The financial audits were ironclad. Harrison looked at Miles with something close to disgust. "You stole from this company. You destroyed careers to hide your incompetence. You signed away control of your department without even reading the contract." Francine from HR, who'd escorted me out a year ago, sat in the corner taking notes. She wouldn't meet Miles's eyes. The board voted unanimously. Miles Trenster was terminated effective immediately. All signing authority revoked, all access denied. Security would escort him from the building. Miles stood there shaking. "This is illegal. I'll sue. I'll destroy all of you." "With what money?" I asked quietly. "The contract you signed transferred all departmental assets to Rhodes Capital. You own nothing." The realization hit him like a physical blow. His knees buckled. He realized too late that he taught me everything I needed to ruin him. Security took his arms gently but firmly. As they led him toward the door, he looked back at me one final time. "Why?" he asked. But I'd already answered that question. I turned back to the board to discuss transition plans. I stood by the lobby windows 30 minutes later, watching Miles leave the building. Reporters had somehow learned about the board meeting. Cameras flashed as he pushed through the crowd. His lawyer tried to make a statement, but Miles just kept walking, head down, defeated. I felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just quiet relief that it was finally over. Victoria joined me at the window. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it carefully. "Tired," I admitted, "but free." Harrison approached us with paperwork. "Miss Rhodes, or should I say Miss Vaughn, the board would like to discuss your role going forward. We need someone to oversee the restructuring of Miles's former department." I nodded. "I'd be honored." As the crowd outside dispersed, I whispered to my reflection in the glass, "It's over." But I was wrong. There was still one more piece to resolve. One more person who deserved justice. I thought of Lila, demoted and silenced for defending me, of the junior analyst fired for questioning expense reports, of all the people Miles had hurt. It wasn't over yet. The next morning, Lila was called to Harrison's office. I waited there with Victoria and the head of HR. Lila looked terrified when she entered. "Please sit," Harrison said gently. "You're not in trouble." We explained everything. How Miles had systematically blamed others for his mistakes. How he'd retaliated against anyone who questioned him. How Lila's demotion had been documented as unjust. "You tried to defend Allison Vaughn when she was wrongly accused," Harrison said. "That took courage." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "I should have done more. I should have fought harder." "You did enough," I said quietly. She looked at me, really looked, and her eyes widened. "Oh my God, you're..." Yes. Lila started crying. We gave her time. Finally, Harrison slid a document across his desk. You're being promoted to senior analyst with immediate effect, back pay included for the time you were wrongly demoted, and we're issuing a formal apology. Lila couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face. As we left Harrison's office, she hugged me tightly. Thank you, she whispered. Justice isn't revenge when it sets others free, I replied. 2 weeks later, Miles's lawyer delivered a single-page letter to Victoria's office. It contained one question, handwritten. Why? Victoria showed it to me over coffee. Do you want to respond? I thought about everything. The humiliation, the theft, the attempted murder disguised as an accident, the year of hiding and planning and rebuilding myself into someone stronger. I could write him a letter, explain how his betrayal had transformed me, tell him that his cruelty had actually set me free by destroying the version of myself that accepted less than I deserved. But words wouldn't change anything. Miles would never understand that he hadn't just buried my career. He'd buried the woman who needed approval, who stayed quiet, who let men like him win. Instead, I took the letter and filed it away without responding. Let him wonder, I told Victoria. That same afternoon, I signed documents donating a significant portion of my Rhodes Capital profits to a scholarship fund. The Vaughan Foundation for Women in Finance would help young women get the education and opportunities I'd fought for. My father would have approved. 3 months later, the board of directors voted unanimously to make me permanent chairwoman of the investment division, the same division Miles had once controlled. My first official act was implementing new ethics guidelines and whistleblower protections. My second was promoting talented people who'd been overlooked. Lila became my second in command. The junior analyst Miles had fired was rehired with a raise. I built a team based on competence and integrity instead of politics and favoritism. The company's culture changed slowly but steadily. People started speaking up in meetings. Ideas were credited properly. Mistakes were learning opportunities instead of execution grounds. The employees who'd watched my humiliation in silence now saw me differently. Some apologized. I accepted gracefully, but kept my distance. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. Harrison retired 6 months later, recommending me as his successor to the full board. At 53, he said he wanted to travel and spend time with his grandchildren. On his last day, he pulled me aside. Your father would be proud, he said quietly. He always believed in building things that lasted. He took my name, I took his legacy. I stood at my father's grave on a cold October morning, holding something I'd carried for over a year, my old employee badge from Trenton Wyatt. The one that had been deactivated before I reached the elevator. The one that had made me feel erased. I placed it gently against the headstone next to the flowers I brought every month. I did it, Dad, I whispered. I became what you always knew I could be. The wind rustled through the cemetery trees. The morning was quiet and peaceful. I thought about Miles, wherever he was now. I'd heard through industry contacts that he couldn't find work. His reputation was destroyed. Every company that searched his name found the story of his fraud and termination. He'd lost everything, his job, his credibility, his future. But I'd gained something invaluable. Not revenge, but transformation. Hellfire isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's the forge that makes you new. I walked back to my car, leaving the badge behind. That version of Allison Vaughn, eager to please, desperate for approval, willing to be small so others could feel big, was buried here, truly dead at last. Miles had thought killing me would solve his problem. He was right in a way, because the woman who needed his approval was gone forever, and the woman who remained was unstoppable.